Panzerschule uses and recommends golden maple brushes. Our painting guides will now show you which golden maple brush type, which brush size we are using for all the different challenges that we meet in our modelling projects. Golden Maple have been making artist brushes for over 30 years. Panzerschule can confidently recommend Golden Maple brushes to you because of the value, the quality and the range of brushes they have in their miniature painting sets. You can see us using the Golden Maple brushes in the following guide, and if you'd like to know more then check the link in the description below. There is also a discount code in the description, and if you use that code when ordering, not only will you save a bit of money, but you'll also help the channel. Now let's get painting. If you're familiar with my painting style, you'll know that I use a layering approach, and to begin with I add shade coats. You can see I've used a shade coat of London Grey on the trousers, shade coat of black on the boots and other grey or black areas, and then German camo, black brown for all the other areas. As I'm building up my layers, it's important that I do not leave too much of the shade coats visible, with the exception of the black areas, which are pretty much going to remain black. Remember folks, that the shade colour is there to give depth and shape to the finished look. It's an accent, it's not part of the final colour, so to speak. To do this, I am using the Golden Maple size 20. It's a long, thin brush with a very good point. The fact that it's long and thin gives it enough flexibility for me to work around the folds of the uniforms, for instance, the folds of the trousers, and it's still got that fine point which gives me the control I need to ensure I'm leaving the right amount of shade. Now what I'm doing here is the initial stage of layering, which I call mapping out. That is where I'm picking out all of the obvious raised areas, all of the high points on the folds on the trousers. When painting like this, and in most approaches, you're going to need 2 coats of paint. You're not going to get it all down in a oneer. If you do, it's not going to look particularly good. So this is not just my first coat, it's also my shaping coat, where I am then ready to refine the finished look with the next pass and also get a more solid coat of paint with the next pass. And here you can see me applying that second coat. You see I'm carefully working all the folds now so that I'm cutting into the shade, being confident with the finished look. We've got complete control over the shade when we follow this approach, and this way we can make sure we've got the right balance. Now I'm using deck tan here as my main white colour. It's not white and it's not grey, it's something in between, which makes it ideal when painting white on large areas such as the trousers. It goes on nice and smooth, and you have a lot more control than you normally have with white paint. You know, white paint can drag, it can clot almost, whereas this goes on nice and smooth. You can see here as the second layer of deck tan has been added, it's becoming much more opaque, much more like white, much less like grey. And here is one more stage you might like to consider when painting very light colours using the layering approach, and that is applying a glaze of the main colour, in this case deck tan, over the entire area. Remember, it's a glaze, we're not trying to apply a wash. We don't want the paint settling in the recessed areas, we just want the recessed areas, which are London Grey, just to soften down a little bit and transition a little bit more softly into the deck tan. That'll dry nice and quick, which means we're ready to apply the highlight, and we're going to use just good old white for the highlight. The amount of white that we use will determine the brightness of the finished look, but we've already basically got white trousers here. To apply the highlights, I'm using the Golden Maple size 30, so it's a step down from what we used for the main colours. It's the same style of brush, so it's got long thin bristles with a good point, and that point is going to be very valuable for the highlighting stage. And having flexible bristles is also very important here, because it allows us to paint the sweeping, even though they're small, they're sweeping highlight lines. Now we need to be careful, just as we were with the shade, on how much of a highlight colour we are applying. If we apply too much, then once again the colour will start to dominate and it won't so much be the highlight as the main colour. So here I'm using thin lines, and typically that's what I do in most cases of my layering. Sometimes with the white here I will add thicker lines, maybe fill in some areas a bit just to bring the brightness up and have a bit of variety between different figures, but generally speaking, thin controlled lines applied in very careful ways. It's important that your brush has the right amount of moisture at this point. If the paint is too wet, it will just kind of flow a little off the surface and you won't get a distinctive highlight. If it is too dry, it will drag across the surface and you'll get a lumpy, broken line of paint. I find the golden maple brushes are great for this, and they give me the kind of control that I need, not just at fine point, but also in the flow of the paint. And that will be the trousers finished. And as you can see, it was a very simple, straightforward process. None of the pain that you normally have when painting white by, trying to wash it all over and then trying to pick everything back out again. This is very controlled layers where we know exactly what to expect and can really determine what the outcome is going to be right at the start. Now we're on to the tunic. Now it's already got a shade coat of German Camo black brown, but I don't want that to be the shade colour on the arms, for instance, on the visible areas of the chest and the abdomen. I want that to be a shade colour between the arms and the torso, for instance, between the torso and all the straps and little bits of detail. So I'm now going to add a separate additional shade coat onto the arms and the chest and the abdomen, so that I can leave that coat in the folds of those areas. And I'm using burnt cadmium red for this. It's a really good shade colour, I recommend it for reds. Now to do this I'm using a size 0 round brush from Golden Maple. So the fact that it's round, or if you look at it it might appear conical, means it's just a bit stiffer, which will give us the control that I need to block in the arms there and to work inside all of those little areas around all the straps. It's still got a great point on it, which means you've still got the control that you need, but that extra degree of stiffness works very well in this situation. Now I'm switching to the size 30 thin brush so that I can work the arms, all the folds on the sleeves. I'm also going to use that on the areas between the straps, but you could use one of the round brushes, so 30 should work fine if you want a greater degree of control in those tight areas. I'm using red here folks, no fancy names, it's just red on the bottle. And I'm going to build up the layers in the same way as we built up the layers on the trousers, except here we don't have to worry too much about the strong transition between, for instance, London Grey and Deck Tan. This is a nice soft transition between the burnt cadmium red and the red. As before, it's going to take 2 coats to get this. The first coat is going to be the mapping out, just as on the trousers. Second coat is going to be the defining layer. It's going to be the layer in which we control how much shade is visible, and it's going to just give us that nice opaque layer of paint that we're after for the layering approach. Then for the highlight, a size 50 Golden Maple, and this is a thin brush once again, and that's going to be very important here because we're going to be controlling the size of these highlight lines that we're applying. The thinness of the brush allows us to sweep around the folds and the shapes of the arm to get a nice smooth line. And remember, these are 3-dimensional pieces, so your highlight line quite often has to start on one side of a very small area and then flow around to the other side of the small area. So a good flexible brush with a good point that allows the paint to flow nice and smoothly and controlled, that's what we're after here. I'm using Scarlett as a highlight colour here. It's not too strong, it's not too much of a contrast, so it's not going to be too bright a finish, but you can use brighter reds if you want much more of a contrast. When you have very bright against the dark shadow, it really pops, but you have to be careful that it doesn't go over the top. And once again here folks, don't put too much highlight on. It's an accent, not the main colour. And when that's done, the two main areas on the miniature are completed. But we've got lots of little areas. We've got straps and cuffs and all manner of equipment that they're carrying. And we're going to continue with the layering approach on all those different challenges. Let's start with a golden maple size 10-0 for the cuffs and collars. Now I gave them a shade coat of German Camo dark green, and the main colour is going to be medium olive. The size 10-0 is going to give us a lot of control, so we should be able to get a nice accurate layer of paint down. But if we paint over, for instance, all the little buckles and buttons that are on the cuffs, you just do a quick tidy up with some German Camo black brown and you're ready to go again. So it's a very forgiving approach. Now I'm not going to apply a highlight to the screen because these areas are so small. The highlight lines would also be so small, and around the cuff would have to be broken and so on. It's just a bit too much going on, a bit too busy. So we don't have to add a highlight or, let's say, a third layer in every instance. Sticking with the size 10-0, I'm now going to start picking out all of the many straps and buckles and such likes that are going to have a white finished look, but using London Grey as a shade colour, that will just allow us to have some nice, very fine shade lines to help the shade pop against the background of the miniature. It becomes more important to manage the moisture levels on your brush when you are painting small areas and using small brushes, because they dry out quicker. The golden maple holds sufficient moisture to allow you to work for a long period between refreshing your brush, but it's very important that you're aware of how the paint is flowing off your brush and it's not too dry. Then we're going to build up the layers on the straps from London Grey through deck tan, ultimately up to white. Now I'm applying the deck tan here. I am being careful to leave shade around the edges of the straps and where they meet either themselves or the collar or the waist and such likes. And then to finish, just using white, I'm going to hit those edges of the straps so that they frame a little bit more. Now it's once again very important that the paint flows nicely off the tip of your brush and that you get some nice accurate straight lines down those edges for as sharp a finish as possible. And we can use that same brush for all of the fine piping, the straps and the buckles and such like that cover Napoleonic figures. With this good point, you will confidently be able to get an accurate look, an accurate finish, and that really helps set off your Napoleonic figures. Now, to save this video running too long, I'm not going to cover every single area that you might paint on this Napoleonic figure. In the description you'll find the paints that I've used listed in the layering sequence. And don't forget, you'll find the link to golden maple brushes in the description too, plus the discount code. So for the rest of the video I'm going to focus on black areas, metallic areas and the skin. So let's make a start with the black, and the golden maple size 0 round brush will be perfect for this, as we're really just going to be painting almost like little blotches. It's not going to be the fine, smooth flowing lines that we would normally paint on arms or legs, for instance. The shoes, backpack and cap all have a shade coat of black. Now when you're painting something black, it's quite hard to shade or highlight it because black is black, but we can still give a degree of depth and shape and highlight to it, and the main paint we're going to use to achieve that is going to be German Grey. This paint is still very dark. It lifts the shape out a little bit from the black but still retains that overall black look, provided you do not overdo it and paint too much on. You can see me working the edges and also just across surfaces a little bit, just to give a bit of a definition of some kind of surface, some kind of depth to things, but don't overdo it and it's still going to have the nice dark black look that we want when we're finished. Then to highlight, we're going to take the very fine 10-0 brush and London Grey. Then we're going to start hitting the edges. Now we're painting very small amounts here. This is just to define the shape. It's not to become the final colour. It's very much a slight accent to the grey, and it just catches the edges even on a black object will still reflect some light, and that's what we're after. But we can also just do some little lines across the surface. Just place it where the German grey and the black meet, and that will create lovely contrast that will clearly define shape but keep it under control, and you're still going to have a lovely dark black finish. Now on to some very basic non-metallic metal, working with the brass to begin with, and I'm going to be working through green brown as a shade colour, Japanese uniform as the main colour, and green ochre as a highlight colour. I'm starting with the round size 0 and then moving to a 10-0 because these areas are really quite small, especially on the cap. The plate there has a lot of detail on it that you want to be able to define and lift it out of the background shade colour. Now you can of course just use metallic paints for this, and just give it a little wash with a suitable wash colour. I prefer the non-metallic metal approach, and a very simple non-metallic metal approach, just because it sits in with the layering style much better. If it's a metallic object and everything else is nicely layered up, it just jars, to my eye at least. Now for the metallics on the musket. So I've given everything a coat of black. You know, when I've been painting the wood on the musket itself, afterwards I've given the metallic areas a nice solid black undercoat, so we get a nice sharp definition, a nice sharp shade line. And then I'm using London Grey to pick out all the sort of bare metal components. And to highlight, I'm going to go back to that old favourite of mine, Deck Tan. It's going to give it a bit of a metallic glint, but we have to be very careful here because it's such a bright colour against the London Grey. The Golden Maple size 5-0 has got a great point and the right amount of flexibility that we need to be painting these thin lines down the length of the barrel, for instance, or along the edges of the bayonet. Now for the scary eyes painting, and I'm going to be using the very fine 10-0 brush for this. I'm painting the eyes immediately after having painted the shade colour onto the skin, and the shade colour I've used there is saddle brown. Note that I've not left any German Camo black brown as internal shade on the face or the hands. It's just a bit too strong if you do that. Just leave the German Camo black brown around the edges of the face or where the hands meet the cuff. Saddle brown is a nice warm shade colour that easily transitions into normal flesh tones. And as we're painting the eyes at this stage, it's going to be very easy for us to correct that saddle brown shade colour if we've made any mistakes. For the eyes themselves, I am using an off-white colour, or once again Deck Tan, which I never seem to leave home without. Pure white can be a bit too bright and a bit too stark, but that might just be a matter of personal preference. Now you can see what I'm doing here for the maximum control. I am lining up the miniature and the brush together in whatever angle is necessary to access the eye nice and easily, and I'm just painting a very short stroke with the brush. It's so very important that you get your paint mixed correctly for this. The right amount of paint and moisture, and then it will flow off in that one simple action that you're after. If you're having to work at it, then the chances are you're not going to get a very clean result. And for the pupil of the eye, I'm going to be using German Camo black brown. Using that very fine brush, a 10-0, I'm going to paint a line down the middle of the eye. Now, because once again we're at the early stages of painting the face, I don't have to worry about getting that black brown onto the saddle brown. I can just boldly paint a thin line down there because I can just tidy up the saddle brown as required. And hopefully you can see how the golden maple brushes are ideal for challenging areas of a miniature such as the eyes. They've got such a great range of small size, small brush types, and the flow quality of the brush is ideal for what we need. Now back to a 5-0, I'm going to start layering up the face. For the main colour of the skin, I am going to use Panzer Ace's Flesh Base, and I'm going to layer it up by following the basic structure of a face. You know, people can see faces, recognise faces in so many different things. They can see it in a cloud, they can see it in a potato. That's because faces have very, very well defined aspects, and we can make it pop more on the figure by concentrating on those particular aspects. So I'm picking out the brows, the nose, the cheeks. Now that's cheekbones under the eyes but also down beside the mouth, and then lips, chin and ears. And be patient, 2 coats will be required, so just as before, map out the shape of the face, and then with your second coat go in there and really define it, control the shade that you're leaving so it's not too much and it's just the accent that we're looking for to give it depth. And then to highlight, I'm going to be using the very fine 10-0 brush, and I'm going to be placing the highlight line pretty much just on the high points here, folks. You know, down the nose, if the brows are visible, across the brows, but definitely under the eyes, and a thin line down beside the nose and the lips, and across the lips and chin. Keep it as before, very small amounts, just as an accent to just create the contrast we need against the shade. So I hope you found that interesting and informative, and give you a few ideas about painting your Napoleonic Brits. And if you do like Golden Maple and you want to know more, don't forget the link is in the description below, and the discount code is down there too if you want to purchase them, save yourself a bit of money, support the channel. But folks, you will genuinely like using these brushes. I wouldn't recommend them if I didn't think they were the best quality. So thank you for watching. If you're a subscriber, thank you for subscribing. If you'd like to support the channel and see more videos of this type as I get them out, then hit the subscribe button, and if you hit the bell button, that means we'll definitely see you all on the next one.